Mr. Olaoluwa. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. He's a senior advisor at ProHealth International on a global health security project. He works in the intersection of public health emergency management and biorisk management, supporting key national and regional stakeholders in the health security space in Nigeria and West Africa to develop legislation, policy briefs, contingency plans, SOPs, and implementation guidance for planning for and response to public health events. He has 9 years of experience supporting preparedness and response at the regional, national, and subnational level. He has keen ongoing research interests in how coordination mechanisms can strengthen governance for health security and how to effectively leverage military and law enforcement capacities for health security. He'll be taking us through a session on setting up coordination mechanisms to foster public health emergency preparedness at national and regional level. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Olaoluwa.
Support, which was set up in 2019, and whose primary focus is the detection, investigation, and response to deliberate events. The other use case is the setup of a multilateral framework for information sharing, surveillance information sharing, but essentially setting up a multilateral framework that has the potential for a lot of other use cases within the health security space. So first of all, a few things about me. The intro already gave you most of what you needed to know. But essentially, I work at ProHealth International on a project called the Integrated Health Surveillance in Integrated Public Health Emergency Response. Our focus basically is supporting the Federal Ministry of Health, the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, and related agencies in workforce development, infrastructural support, and other kind of technical support to both interpret the international health regulations and to essentially implement, build capacities for health security in the country. One of the areas, the more recent areas of support that we've been giving to the government of Nigeria is the support to the Office of the National Security Advisor, where the National Technical Working Group for Linking Public Health Security is located. So the first thing I would like to do is establish what I mean by a coordination mechanism. Then we'll look at the use cases very quickly. So when I say a coordination mechanism in the context of health security, I'm talking about the setup of a committee, like a network or a working group or a task force, any platform essentially that brings together a multi-sectoral and diverse group of stakeholders that plan, mobilize resources, make key decisions, and offer technical support to stakeholders across national, subnational, and regional levels. The essential thing, the key thing to note with coordination mechanism is that they offer a platform for multi-sectoral exchange of context. A coordination mechanism is fully working or fully functional when it enables the breakdown of context silos and the breakdown of expertise silos. So a good example is if we need to implement a measure at points of entry related to international travel. The the public health agencies or the public health practitioners may not necessarily have the context needed to fully formulate a coherent plan for international travel related measures. But if they do have in the room partners from the Civil Aviation Authority and other agencies from the point of entry sector, that context gap, that knowledge gap is broken. So this essentially is the reason why we need a coordination mechanism. I'll go further into what it does. Like I said, it breaks down context and expertise silos. It helps us establish a common picture. So you want to ensure that when you're responding to an event, the epidemiologist and the security agents and the private sector all have a common picture. We understand the risk as it should be. And also we are using a common language. Again, it bridges communication gaps. It ensures that we don't have to go through multiple layers before we communicate something, and then it's bonds red tape. Essentially, the questions that a coordination mechanism at any level of any kind helps us to answer is when there is a public health event or emergency happening, are we seeing the same event in the same way? Do we have the same assessment or characterization of the risk? It's entirely possible that an epidemiologist may not see what is required to be seen for a event to be considered a deliberate event. An epidemiologist just sees symptoms, an outbreak, their index of suspicion about the deliberate, about malicious use, as it were, is rather low compared to an intelligence officer or compared to a military officer. And when we have coordination mechanisms that contain all the sectors, we're able to share expertise, share perspective, and arrive at what is close to a common picture, a common risk characterization. We also want to know that we have every resource available to us to deal with this. It's often the case that when public health actors are responding to public health emergencies, they have they only think of counting on the resources that they have. Meanwhile, there's probably a high-level military lab and then extensive logistic capacity in terms of warehouses, in terms of trucks, in terms of airlifting capacity that could have been used at the start of the response that isn't available because there is no knowledge of its availability. So we want to know that all the resources that we have, we're using all the resources that we have. It's untenable if we lose ground against an event or a response or in a response because we were using less resources than we were able to. And then that's related to how quickly we're able to move. We can easily say the military, for instance, or the private sector have capacity to move logistics, to move, say, highly fragile, highly sensitive luggage from point A to point B in a country faster than, say, public health officers will be able to manage that because they have extensive training, extensive experience doing that regularly. And so we want to know that everything that we can possibly do to reduce the impact of the unfolding event is being done. And this is the reason why we set up emergency operation centers, the reason why we set up task forces, the reason why we set up, committees that respond to events. Now, so I would speak to what Nigeria did. Two things Nigeria did to help them respond. Set up coordination mechanisms that helped us, that has been helping us build health security capacity for both Nigeria and for both the region. So the first is the linking public health security. So in 2019, partly as a response to the joint external evaluation that was conducted in 2017 in Nigeria, a key recommendation of that joint external evaluation is the setup of a National Technical Working Group for Linking Public Health Security. I don't know if we're all aware of what the Joint External Evaluation is. It's a tool designed by the WHO to help state parties do an assessment of their health security capacities across 19 technical areas. One of the technical areas is linking public health to security. The key target of setting up such a coordination mechanism, the technical working group, is to, in the event of a biological event of suspected or confirmed deliberate origin, to have a country be able to conduct rapid multi-sectoral response, including the capacity to link public health and law enforcement, and to provide and or request effective and timely international assistance, including to investigate alleged use of malicious use of pathogens for among civil populations. So the picture there you see is the picture of the inaugural meeting of the National Technical Working Group for Linking Public Health Security. My team helped support both technically and funded the setup of that organization, of that technical working group. It was located in the office of the National Security Advisor. This was because that office already conducts or performs a coordination role in the security space, both for the armed forces, a coordination role that brings together the armed forces, the security agencies, and the law enforcement agencies to ensure that there is a common picture against any threat, whether it's terrorism or whether it's any other kind of security threat. So in the years following the inauguration of this meeting, of this technical working group, the group has done a few things to ensure that we are able to build capacity, and these are the things we've done. 1 minute. All right, we've established a joint national biosecurity common picture, or rather in the process of establishing that. We've conducted joint trainings and exercises. One of them would have been the international joint bioterrorism training that we requested. But in the meantime, we've also conducted a training on biorisk management, another training on public health emergency management. And in all the cases, it's a joint training, meaning we have members of the public health agencies in the room, while we also have members of the armed forces, the security agencies in the room. We've also conducted simulation exercises as part of this capacity building exercises. One of the advantages of having joint exercises is that those are the opportunities to have to actually break down the context barriers. If you do an exercise where you have an event unfolding in, say, there's a city in Nigeria that's known for mining. One of our scenarios for one of the exercises we did had an event unfolding in that city, and the conclusion of the public health agencies, or members from public health agencies, was a suspicion of mining activities leaking into drinking water and contaminating the drinking water, causing the diseases, the symptoms that was being reported. But a few of the security agencies have a rather different perspective, because there was also the additional context of the fact that northern Nigeria generally is a very volatile area, has the security problem with ISWAP and a number of other so-called bandits moving around. There was suspicion of some malicious action, especially given the value of those mining fields. So it becomes clear when you conduct exercises like that that public health experts generally have a bias or a bent towards being preoccupied with biosafety, um, and less uh, or have less intuition for biosecurity as a way of viewing events. And it is this shifting of the perspective towards a more common ground that is what we are aiming at for here. One of the things we also did that we have done and we're doing is we're adapting a national counterterrorism crisis doctrine that was signed into law recently into for the bioterrorism use case. Um, Naturally, the document doesn't go into any detail about bioterrorism, but it's the principles and the doctrines it proposes are broad enough to accommodate that. So we're developing specific communication, detection, coordination protocols, thresholds, and how to essentially respond using that document. It's essentially the legal instrument on which we're basing a lot of the collaboration and investigative actions needed to be taken if a deliberate event is suspected. Um, and the other thing we are doing is establishing a resource sharing framework that ensures that there is a common picture or bird's eye view, as it were, among all agencies of what exists or what capacities exist. The resource matrix has asset categories like human resource, laboratories, logistics, which involve things like warehouses, trucks, airlifting capacity. It is often the case we saw during the COVID-19 response, especially in the early days of the response, during the lockdowns and beyond the lockdowns, uh, that there was significant capacity that we were not aware of in the military and the security sector. So, for instance, there were a number of labs within the security sector that had PCR capacity that had never been used, even during they were not used even during the Ebola scare we had in 2014, 15, or during any of the outbreak Nigeria has had since then. But once during COVID, because there was a presidential task force that had the force of the center bringing everyone together, or the force of the presidency, as it were. All of these resources were revealed, and it was surprising that there was so much resources available that weren't being taken advantage of by both national level and sub-national level public health actors. And so one of the things we wanted to do was ensure that there is a clear picture of what is where and what can be used for what in response to emergencies, whether it's a large-scale emergency like COVID or a smaller scale emergency like a cholera outbreak somewhere or Lassa fever outbreak, which is the current event we have in Nigeria. Um, Right, so this is a broad overview of what we've been doing. As a matter of fact, we do have a workshop planned for November this year. And in that workshop, we would continue to extend the gains made across this three areas. So I will move on quickly to the second use case, then I'll pause for questions. So the second use case requires some context setting. Um, the first thing to know is that Nigeria is often thought of as being in West Africa, but we do in fact have borders with two Central African countries. We have land borders with Benin and Niger to our left and our north, to the west and to the north. And to the north and to the east, we have borders with, as you can see on this map, with Chad and Cameroon. Chad and Cameroon are in Central Africa. But that's not the only reason why Nigeria is in a interesting or rather strategic epidemiological situation. We know that currently Central and West Africa is a hotbed of zoonosis, a lot of emerging infection outbreaks happening. There's also the fact that there is a lot of movement of persons and goods in this area. There is a trans-Saharan route which terminates in Nigeria across the Sahel, and it's a volatile security situation, and the fact that migrants both set out largely from this part of the country, from this part of the region, and largely terminate here too when they are being sent back. We also understand that there is a corridor. In fact, one of the largest corridor in terms of human traffic in Africa, the Lagos-Abidjan corridor. It passes through Ghana, Togo, Benin, and it's significant for human traffic. So because of this, and also because although West Africa, through the ages of West African Health Organization, has a lot of coordination mechanism to try to create a common language and picture and have and build capacity in West Africa. For instance, they do have a biosecurity regional working group. They have an MOU for information sharing for public health events. Although that MOU has not been signed by the ministers, it's been in the works for more than half a decade. But the region is doing this all this work. But we understand that that work is not sufficient for us, since we have borders with countries that are not part of West Africa. So what we set out to do was to create a contract around most of these capacities with these four countries that surround us, to have a sort of coordination platform. First of all, where we starting with establishing critical information requirements that we share between each other. So what we did was set out to establish a national cross-border technical committee. This technical committee consists largely of agencies within Nigeria, but in addition to that, we have a special guest role for the international health regulations focal persons, who, by the way, in case you're not aware, are responsible for notification of any events to the WHO network internationally. We have that office and an additional office from the MOH from each one of the four countries around us. We had a term of reference and a plan for the near term, which is like a 2-year plan. And then we decided to start with the basics of agreeing on terms for sharing surveillance information. Essentially, if there's an event, there's an outbreak of disease, or there's a public health event, which is not even an outbreak of any event at all. It could be a chemical event unfolding in any part of a border community. We have a protocol for national level exchange of information and joint investigation, and district level exchange of information and joint investigation. The district level bit of the work is requires a little bit of work to ensure that the officers at the district level have the capacity to respond, to detect, to investigate, and to respond. What we have done to do that is try to establish at the district level cross-border forums. These are pictures of cross-border forums that have been established in the last 1 year at the Nigerian-Niger border and at the Nigerian-Benin border here. So what these groups do essentially is build capacity, have a platform where they meet regularly, periodically for some, monthly for some, depending on what they decide, and have a shared picture of what triggers constitutes an event and how they'll set out to conduct joint investigations and share resources. There have been a lot of cases of instances where a lot of joint investigation and shared resources have happened. In cases where AFP cases have been detected in the Nigerian-Niger border area, and in instances where recently a suspected Lassa case was discovered in the Nigerian Benin border. So this is what we think we would achieve with this going forward. We want to hold regular multilateral engagement on information sharing, joint investigation and response. And as much as possible, we would like to expand the scope, the health security scope of this to more than just sharing information and potential joint investigation of events. We want to eventually, this is not part of the near-term plan, it's part of the 2-year plan, but eventually we want to have agree a common picture for biosecurity priorities and do joint capacity building. And then monitor progress and respond to district level events. At the district level, we want to expand the number of borders. Nigeria has more than 80 individual manned ground crossings. Those are the manned ones. So there's quite a lot. We're going to try to expand where we have this structured cross-border forums and ensure that they have facilitated meetings. In order to set this up, we sent down teams to each one of those borders where we set up these forums and had them do some hand-holding and capacity building in setting up these forums. One other thing that I didn't speak to because it's not of the scope of this is that each of the ground crossings where this happened have something called a public health emergency contingency plan. It's an all-hazard plan that is activated whenever there is an event around there. But that's a completely different topic. I will just speak quickly now to considerations and challenges of setting up coordination mechanisms that we have encountered in our experience. In my experience, each time there's been an attempt to have coordination mechanisms that has worked, it's because there is a dedicated facilitator doing it, facilitating that coordination mechanism. In the case of COVID-19, for instance, when most countries set up task forces, it is largely because it was centered in the executive. Most of the other coordination mechanisms we have, like the National Public Health Emergency or Operation Centers, have clear roles about facilitation. For other public coordination mechanisms like TWGs, committees that are external to the PHEOC at the national level or the state level, often an external third-party facilitator is for the early days, before silos are broken down and contexts are shared, is very critical. And even when we set up PHEOCs, it's often the case that I have some experience with the NCDC team that has been setting up subnational PHEOCs in Nigeria. It's often the case that there's a need for some hand-holding to ensure that the coordination bit is gotten right. One of the misconceptions that people have about coordination mechanisms is that they are essential to response, and only to response. But it is my belief, it's our finding that the best work of coordination mechanisms are done outside of response times. When simulation exercises have been conducted by EOCs or joint capacity building have been done, there are a lot of things that happen that ensure that when an event happens and responses is needed to be done, it is movement is much more swifter, and work is done in much more smoother fashion than if coordination mechanisms are only set up during emergencies. So it's essential that TWGs, task forces, public health emergency operation centers continue to run, but during emergencies and outside of emergencies. Of course, there are for PHUs there are modes of operation. We have the watch mode, the alert mode, and the response mode. And during watch mode, what you do is gather information, conduct exercises, conduct trainings, and all that. Another thing to point out is that coordination mechanism needs to be integrated. It is essential that we have not just one coordination mechanism, not just one national model of all coordination mechanisms. We need subnational, we need sector-specific coordination mechanisms. For instance, a coordination mechanisms for public health events in aviation may be necessary. Such mechanisms need to be linked to a central mechanism. If there is a national PHUOCs, to be good for that, for any sector-specific mechanism to be linked to that, or any subnational committee or task force to be linked to that, to ensure that there is easy passage of information between groups, and that the country is working from a general blueprint or speaking the same language when it comes to risk communication. Finally, the joint, I think I've mentioned this before, that the joint capacity building and the exercises that we conduct is the critical part that breaks down the silos, that ensures that we converge around a general common context when over time, as we facilitate these operations in coordination mechanisms. So these are my thoughts. I hope I wasn't being too fast. I speak a little bit fast. So please, if you have questions, ask them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Olaoluwa, for that wonderful session. Do we have any questions or comments regarding what was shared? Okay.
Okay, thank you for this presentation. I have a question or a comment. I will say a comment. You know, there's so many committee, bilateral committee between, for example, Niger and Nigeria. You have a committee, a technical cooperation committee that hold a meeting every year. Do you think this can be an opportunity when we can discuss security, health security, and also One Health discussion on One Health? Because this committee hold every year, but it's mostly about education, trade, and if you can take the opportunity to add a discussion on health security, I think it can be a good opportunity for country to discuss about that issue.
Yes, so I agree. A lot of the times when bilateral ties are set up, what often happens is that it's about trade, about security. the first Lagos Abidjan Corridor organization that was set up was essentially about trade. But over time, after the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, a health component was added to the Lagos Abidjan Corridor. So I believe that health security components need to be added to any bilateral committees or agreements being struck. The only challenge is that that's an annual meeting, and you require something more responsive to have an effective coordination mechanism. So, but I believe that we should move towards ensuring that most bilateral engagements or multilateral engagements consider health security as a key agenda.
We have another question here.
Thank you for the presentation. My concern comes in with approaching a common language or picture, given the fact that we have what we call an event geography or pathogen geography. So I'm looking at how we can approach a common language or picture, but some of the pathogens are localized for a specific area, or even the way they affect and the way the infectious cycle happens, or the way the event turns around. It could be different from the organization or country I want to partner with. So how do you go about that in terms of coordination?
I didn't quite hear everything, but I assume you are talking about the fact that countries have different set of priorities when it comes to infectious diseases.
Yes.
Correct. Yes. So what we did, both in the work we did, we're doing with WAHO to design the information sharing framework for the 14 countries, and for the 5-country framework we're setting up with Benin, Niger, and Cameroon. We initially set out with a table that has each country's set of priority diseases. We understand that Nigeria's set of priority disease is very different from, not very different. Often it's just one disease or two that are off the list from Ghana's list of priority infectious diseases. So we have a table that have each person's list of priority diseases. But what it means is if I share a border with Benin, automatically Benin's list of priority diseases becomes mine when there is an event happening in my borders of that priority disease from Benin. So I respond and report as if this is a priority disease for us. So that is the essential. In fact, that's one of the key objectives of this. That a disease is not on a list of priority diseases doesn't mean I will treat it as any other disease if it's happening at a border with a neighboring country that has that disease as a priority disease. So one of the things we do is have that table where we share a common picture and we'll agree that these are priority diseases for the region. Countries can reserve the right to say we still only have 14 priority infectious diseases, but we understand that X disease is a priority to Niger, and if it's happening within our borders, close to Niger's border, we're going to respond to it with the same, take it serious as much as Niger is. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
So thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and I highly commend you for your work in creating networks before the event. This is something that's I've been working on probably the last 15 years or so, is trying to build those networks prior to events. So I really appreciate what you're saying. In your slide where you mentioned the key questions and the key outcomes, that's a wonderful summary of the benefits of doing this, but I think you could add to that the human dimension, that by creating, you did mention getting rid of red tape, but by having people meet face to face beforehand, you make communications so much easier once you need to have that rapid and clear communication during an outbreak. So by having those meetings, by creating the networks beforehand, you definitely are facilitating better communication. You're creating the team ahead of the event. You've mentioned red tape, but you're getting rid of that sort of defending each person's turf. You get away from that jealousy over responsibility. And I think you talked about getting common language. Common language is hugely important because it helps build towards common purpose and common goal, which also builds into motivation and to good team forming. So I think all of those things are things that you can add to that great slide that you have about the benefits of creating networks ahead of time. One small question, and I was very interested to see that you've been doing bilaterals between Nigeria and all of its nations. I worked briefly with the Middle Eastern Center for Infectious Disease Surveillance, which is Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. Now you can imagine the political difficulties of setting that surveillance network. What they discovered was when they tried to do joint exercises, the disparity between the preparedness and the advanced state of Israeli preparedness vis-a-vis particularly the Palestinian preparedness created a level of national embarrassment. And what we found was it was better to do the national exercises first before trying to do the trilateral exercise, so that the Jordanians and the Palestinians didn't feel embarrassed during the exercise vis-a-vis, in relation to their performance vis-a-vis the performance of the Israelis. Have you encountered similar issues in trying to deal with your neighbors, and is that why you chose to go the bilateral route first? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's not an exact match of the situation, but it's very similar. Nigeria is is much bigger and much more. The health systems are much more sophisticated, I believe, than what we have around our neighbors. A quick example is that Nigeria has a port health services, that is the competent public authority at points of entry. A number of our neighboring countries do not have that. Benin used to have that, but for some reason in 2019, the president withdrew them after some reports of corruption or something. I don't think Niger has them at all. I think the district, the DSNO, the district surveillance officer, doubles as someone that investigates any report of events at the border. And often there is just a general, whenever there is a joint event, there's a clear indication of the gap in capacity, especially when it comes to preparedness. This is a little bit ironic or paradoxical, because at the district level, at the border themselves, there's a strange pattern of health seeking that we see. So if one of the reasons why we've had up to 3 cases in the past 3 years of Lassa fever cases from Nigeria crossing to Benin, is that people often go to the French-speaking countries to seek healthcare if they are ill, and so that is one clear pattern of behavior. But in terms of being able to bring national capacity to address an outbreak, Nigeria seems to have this muzzle for that, and that's probably just due to having more resources than its neighbors. so yes, there's this disparity. It's not as extreme as what you have described with Israel and its neighbors, but yes, we've seen this. But we also just know that Nigeria shares border with Benin, but Benin doesn't share border with Cameroon. Neither does Chad share border with Benin. So we understand that we need to do the bilateral engagements pari passu with the multilateral engagements, regardless of any disparity in capacity. Does that answer your question? And thank you very much for the comments about that slide. I would definitely make it better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I would like to know what do you do to maintain the coordination mechanism in national level and a country border meeting in crisis period and after crisis. If because many of the funding is given with partner, it is possible for you to maintain this mechanism?
So yes, so that's a question that's always that's always asked. What is the sustainability plan? What is your plan to ensure that if you're out of the system can work on its own? So I'll start with the district level. A number of the meetings, in fact, that are happening at the district level happen without our input. So we have a team that has gone to the district level to do some handholding and supported meetings. But for instance, in the Nigerian-Benin border, we've had multiple borders that have had meetings that they set up on their own and conducted without us being there. They just sent us pictures and reports. And in the Nigerian-Niger border, as a matter of fact, historically, they've had meetings that were in the days when the polio outbreak was rather acute in that region. They had a similar forum, to address cross-border transmission of polio cases. And that forum still exists and still functions outside of external inputs. So I believe that once stakeholders have a sense of the risks involved and the value of such a forum, they would find a way to support it. That's not been the case with a lot of district level borders that we have withdrawn support from because of funding restrictions. Sometimes they just go cold and don't do anything until maybe there is an event, and then they start calling. But we know that a few of them, like the ones I've mentioned in the Niger border and the one at Kamba at the Nigerian-Benin border, have been self-sustaining. So I imagine that in certain cases that can happen. But what the solution we're putting in place for that is this national cross-border committee that is meant to conduct monitoring of the district level forums. At the national level, everything that has been done with the support of Pro Health International and the West African Health Organization, as well as the support of WHO. But I believe that that the NCDC, that is the IHR unit, the International Health Regulations unit in NCDC, and the Federal Ministry of Health, Port Health Services, already have certain allocations in their budget to support some of these activities. As a matter of fact, there is a current series of supportive supervision visits that is ongoing, that is partly funded by the MOH itself. So most of our advocacy over the years have always been that these novel interventions that we introduce into the system are included in the annual planning documents so that they are funded. That is not often the case, but this part of the work, the advocacy for funding for sustainability, is the hard part of the work. It takes years to take effect, and we know that it would eventually work, but we just need to keep working on it. Does that answer the question?